Well, thank you, Carl. It's really terrific to be invited by this organization that I admire so much, the National Endowment for Democracy, and by a man, to be introduced by Carl Gershman, who I've known for many, many years. We've worked together and had common bond on issues of human rights, democracy, and freedom issues, where Carl has been a leader and a passionate champion throughout his life. So I congratulate you, Carl. I congratulate NED for the fantastic work you do. I'm here to speak today about an issue I really care deeply about, which is Burma and its future. I must say it's hard to come here on the heels of Secretary Clinton's speech in December to NDI, which I consider to be one of her finest speeches, and which on the future of democracy, and I commend it to you. I want to thank the NED team that's worked and played a leading role in promoting democracy and civil society in Burma for more than 20 years. I'd also like to recognize many friends and colleagues in this room who've stood with the Burmese people for decades, both through their programs to promote democracy and their humanitarian work. Groups like the Open Society Institute, the Norwegian Burma Committee, DANITA, the International Rescue Committee. In fact, every group here at the Burma Donors Forum and many, many more. I salute you for your continued dedication to this important work. But most of all, I want to honor and pay tribute to the Burmese activists, several of whom were here and spoke to you, who've sacrificed so much to bring about the changes that we're here to discuss. Hindsight being 2020, we can look back over the last year, 2011, and see that governments around the world have made choices that have a profound effect on their people. In Egypt, for example, President Hosni Mubarak could not stand in the way of the winds of change that swept through Tahrir Square and the transition to democracy that continues to move forward. And although we must expect and are seeing both difficulties and setbacks, as in every democratic transition, the Egyptian people are now charting their own future and seeking to build the kind of durable, inclusive democracy that they so much deserve. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad and his government have made a different choice, attempting to cling to power. Since that decision, more than 5,400 people, mostly peaceful demonstrators, have been killed by government security forces. This week, we're continuing to work with the Arab League to shape an appropriate and effective international response at the UN Security Council, part of our effort to end this tragic chapter in Syria's history. But the news out of Burma has been much more hopeful, as the government has taken a series of actions to change course after years and years of isolation and serious human rights abuses. When I traveled there in December with Secretary Clinton, we saw the possibility of real democratic change that could eventually lead to a brighter future for Burma. The statements from Naypyidaw are certainly encouraging. At a dinner in Singapore also on Monday night, President Thein Sein said, according to press reports, and I'm quoting, "We want our people to take part in the democratic reform process, and we want democracy to thrive in Myanmar. I wish to assure you that I shall endeavor to establish a healthy democracy in Myanmar." If the leaders continue on this path towards democracy and openness, they will free all remaining political prisoners. They will hold fair elections on April 1st. Giving their people a genuine say in how they're governed. They will end restrictions on the media and the internet. They will end divisive ethnic conflicts, and they will begin to build a more integrated and peaceful society. If they continue to pursue this path, they will end their international, economic, and political isolation, attract aid and investment, and be in a position to build a strong and inclusive economy that shares prosperity widely. Of course, they won't transform the country overnight, but they will begin to build the kind of government that Burma's people deserve. I come to speak with you today with great humility because I'm not a Burma expert, and I know many of you have worked on these issues for years or even decades. I had not visited the country until last fall, and when I first went with Special Envoy Derek Mitchell in November, and then again with the Secretary Clinton in December, what I did do is to bring to the discussion the experience I've had with countries that are beginning down the long and hard road towards democracy. And based on that experience, I feel it's a rare privilege to be able to offer help to a country at such an important time. But our engagement has to start with a clear-eyed assessment of where there has been progress and what remains to be done. Let's start with the progress. We have seen, as Carl said, movement on at least 3 important fronts. First is the release of political prisoners. Since October, the government has released more than 500 political prisoners, at least one of whom is in this room. That includes most of the high-profile prisoners. Some of these people had spent literally decades in jail for nonviolent expression of their political views. Min Ko-9, for example, was a Generation 88 student leader who spent most of the last 15 years in jail. He was rearrested for organizing peaceful walking demonstrations in Rangoon in 2007 and sentenced to 65 years in prison. 65 years. Last week, he and 4 other free Generation 88 leaders held a press conference and promised to support those who want to build justice, freedom, and equality in Myanmar. There is U Jae-min, a Rohingya rights activist who was elected as a member of parliament in 1990, but then sentenced to 47 years in prison in 2005 after he met with an international delegation investigating forced labor violations in Burma. His wife, 2 daughters, and son were also rounded up and sentenced to 17 years simply for being his family members. Today, he's also free. His wife and 2 daughters were also freed with him. His son, however, remains in jail. And there is Hila La Win, a young journalist arrested while interviewing monks and community leaders on video. She was first charged with having an illegally imported motorcycle. Then, when she was discovered to be a journalist, she was sentenced to an additional 20 years for violating the Electronics Act, which prohibits uploading or downloading data deemed damaging to security. She also was released last month. And of course, we have Zaganar here with us wonderfully, who I met on both of my visits, and who was released in October after 11 years of detention, abuse, and torture. His first order of business, as he told you this morning, after getting out of jail, was to call on the government to release those who are left behind in prison. And he has bravely continued that up until today. We welcome him here, and we are honored to host him and his colleagues at the State Department tomorrow. Welcome. President Obama applauded the release of these prisoners of conscience as a, and I'm quoting here, crucial step in Burma's democratic transformation and national reconciliation process. These released prisoners, lawyers, journalists, bloggers, activists, ethnic and religious leaders will be a key in building Burma's future. A second area where the actions of the Burmese government are significant is in the opening of a greater debate and discussion on political issues. In the last year, the government has re-engaged with Aung San Suu Kyi in substantive dialogue. It's amended the electoral laws, allowing the National League for Democracy and other opposition parties to register as political parties and to begin preparing and participating in the April by-elections. It has begun to ease some of the restrictions on media and civil society, and it's beginning to allow humanitarian access. A third area, related area where the government has undertaken reform is in building stronger democratic foundations. Last year, the government passed a new labor law that expands the rights of workers and will allow unions to become legal again for the first time since the 1970s. In December, the Parliament passed new legislation protecting the right of assembly. We have heard reports that work on a revised press freedom law is also underway, and the government has established a new Human Rights Commission. But much remains to be done. Hundreds of political prisoners are still being held, and the number of laws used to arrest and detain them remain on the books. Censorship has been relaxed, but the censorship board remains in place. NGOs are allowed to operate, but many have not been allowed to legally register. Probably the most important and difficult challenge remaining is the need to end violence in ethnic minority areas and to advance an inclusive, meaningful dialogue leading toward genuine national reconciliation. The government has struck preliminary ceasefire agreements with the Shan State Army and with the Karen National Union, which has been involved in one of the longest running civil wars anywhere in the world. And yet at the same time, violence in the Kachin state has worsened with reports of serious human rights abuses and violations of international humanitarian law. Ultimately, the ethnic violence is rooted in political causes, and it will require negotiated political solutions on both sides to address the underlying grievances. In the coming months and years, we must steel ourselves for challenges that will inevitably come with this transition. Over the years, it's my observation that when ossified societies begin to loosen up, the process is neither linear nor smooth. That is why this administration is committed to a long-term engagement, one that both continues to push for reform and change while at the same time offering encouragement and support. As Secretary Clinton has said, the United States will meet action with action. In response to the January 13th prisoner releases, for example, Secretary Clinton announced that we will exchange ambassadors. In a step-by-step fashion, we hope to build a relationship built on mutual respect and tangible progress on issues that matter most to improving the daily lives of people. Where Burma goes from here will depend on the political will of its leaders and the willingness of the government's opponents to engage. And this political will needs to flow from both directions, from the top down and from the bottom up. The President and his advisors have created a kind of top-down reform process that pushed through initiatives at a rapid pace that I just described, and this is to their credit. These changes have opened political space, but the opening of this political space doesn't necessarily bring meaningful change unless people move into the space and start to use it. It's like an empty house. If a house is in bad shape, you may have to shore up the roof and hang some drywall before you can even move in. Then you need to bring some furniture in, move in, hang pictures that express your vision of what a home should look like, and invite a bunch of your friends over for dinner or plant a garden. Then the empty house starts to become a home, your home. To make Burma a home for all of its people requires broad grassroots engagement by the widest possible range of politically active citizens, ethnic leaders and bloggers, lawyers defending clients, lawmakers writing new media reform freedom laws, factory workers forming unions and negotiating for better conditions and higher pay, human rights advocates working with local power brokers to stop forced labor, NGOs working to bring child soldiers home. All of these groups will need to push for structural change from the bottom up at the same time as the political leadership works to push reform from the top down. I don't know where these two forces will meet. It's not for us to say. It's up to the Burmese to find the place where the two sides meet, to build trust on both sides, and to negotiate a space where they can coexist peacefully. That process is how durable, systematic change happens. So the project of reforming the system from within is immense. It will require both political will and dynamism from the bottom up. Those who have profited from power in every country are often resistant to sharing it, and thus a backlash is always possible. I've been accused of being an irrational optimist, but I do believe there is reason to be optimistic with respect to Burma. That doesn't mean that we assume everything is going to work out or that we rush our engagement faster than the reforms warrant. But it does mean that we reconsider long-held assumptions, recognize the dynamic change that is occurring, and seize the opportunities to support the people, especially politically active civil society, to pursue real sustainable reforms from within. And frankly, there's another reason for my optimism. Her name is Aung San Suu Kyi. Her country is fortunate to have a leader of her principles and her caliber to inspire and guide the country through these tumultuous times. On my last visit, I was struck by the warmth and welcome given to the Secretary. The crowds lined the streets for miles to welcome her. The beautiful hug she got from Aung San Suu Kyi. The man who took an American official's hand aside at the airport and said with tears in his eyes, "Thank you for coming to our country." The desire expressed by so many Burmese to rejoin the world, and not just the international banking system, but the international community as a whole. Change is never guaranteed, but there is an appetite for change. And I know that all of you continue to work extremely hard to be part of it. So I'm going to stop here and thank you for your attention, and I'm delighted to answer your questions.